Stabilization grants, and you can learn more and click the Learn More there. You'll come to the Stabilization Grant page. And there are 3 documents that will be quite helpful to you in this process. So one is the frequently asked questions. The other is the Child Care Stabilization Grant application guidance document. And then the third is the application user guide. So if you don't have those up or printed already, I would have you reference those as well, because that will be very helpful to you as we walk through this process. So giving a little bit of background on the stabilization grants. So they are from federal dollars with the American Rescue Plan Act, so the ARPA funds. This initial wave of funding was made through the Ohio Controlling Board, and it was $161 million. And so those funds are included in this, what we're calling this first wave of funding. There will be additional money that is available. ODJFS, who is the funding organization, is working on that guidance as we speak. And so that additional information will be coming soon. OCCRRA serves as the administrative organization. So through the Ohio Professional Registry and our support here in our organization, we're working through the applications. We'll help you through the reconciliation process. The payment will come through OCCRRA. So that would be the administrative components of the grants. So this first phase, the application opened on December 1st of 2021. There is still plenty of time to complete the application for this first round of funds as it closes on May 31st, 2022. To access the application, it'll be available through the organization dashboard of the Ohio Professional Registry. So if you have dashboard permissions for your organization, you'll be able to see the application and access it there. If you don't see that, we definitely have you send a correspondence with our support team to make sure you get the proper permissions so you're able to access that. There are 3 sub-grants that we'll be talking about today. The first one is operating new pandemic costs. The second is workforce recruitment and retention. And the third is access development. And we'll go into greater detail on what each one of those are. When we're taking a look at the grant allocation formula, it was based on a few items. One is on the program type. And then based on that program type, determine the sub-grant eligibility. So which one of those grants or all of them might be eligible for the program. And then for centers and ODE who are serving publicly funded children, it was also based on licensing capacity as of November 28th, 2021. And so this next chart that I'll show you provides by that program type which sub-grants are available. And so if you are a center, a family child care type A or type B, all of the sub-grants are available to you. For approved day camps, all but technology. In-home aides have operating new pandemic costs and school age support. And ODE who serve publicly funded children have operating and workforce recruitment and retention. And this chart is also located in our frequently asked questions document in case you want to have a quick reference for that later on. So taking a moment to look at the application requirements. So once you have accessed the application, there's going to be information that is pre-populated from the Ohio Professional Registry. So things like license number, the organization name, because we already have that information, so we've included that already. There's going to be questions about the applicant's demographic information. So this is based on who's completing the application. And so we ask that the person who opens the application and finishes it all the way through, which means they've completed the first part of the application and the payment portal, is the same person who has access to all of that information. If for some reason someone has opened that cannot do that, reach out to us, because we'll have to close that application so that one can be opened and completed with the appropriate person. Why that is because the demographic information gets tagged to the person who opens it. So if that's not the person who should be completing the whole process, we need to make sure that ties out. Then wanted to talk a little bit about some of the field and the terminology that you'll see in the application. So the first part is the maximum funding amount. So for each of the subgrants, operating, workforce recruitment and retention, and access development, it's been calculated about how much each of those program types should receive. And that is the maximum funding amount for that subgrant. In the application, you'll be asked for what the requested funding amount is. The requested funding amount, you can enter the maximum funding amount that's available if you believe that you have expenses that will support the whole funding amount that's allowed. You can select a number that's less than the maximum funding amount if you don't believe that you have expenses or will have expenses for the entire amount. Or you can also select 0 if you would like to waive a particular subgrant. It might be one of the access developments you don't see for your program that you'll be able to utilize funds in the way that's described there. So you could enter a 0 for just that subgrant to waive that particular funding. The second part of the application is completing a payment portal. And this is a secure area of the website that has 2 functions. One is to provide us with a substitute W-9. So it's asking for tax ID information, and then the payee who's associated with that tax ID so that we can get those to match as well. And then it also asks for banking information. So this is the first time at the program level that we're able to complete these transactions versus electronic funds transfers. So that new opportunity we have to collect the information to be able to complete that. And if there isn't a bank account associated with your program, you can check at that point that you would like to receive a paper check instead. So that type of information is collected in the payment portal. So taking a look at the subgrant activities. So each one of the subgrants has particular activities associated with them. And in the application guidance document, this will be the document that will provide the most assistance in that concept of what's allowable. So in that document, we have allowable expenses, as well as the examples of the reconciliation supporting documentation that will be helpful as we get to a point of reconciliation. And we'll talk a little bit more about reconciliation in a few minutes. So with the operating new pandemic costs, this piece is tied around that personnel costs, so payroll, salaries, employee benefits. So this could be health, dental, vision insurance, retirement costs and contributions, paid sick or family leave. It also includes ongoing costs, so things related to rent, mortgage payments, business utility bills, so that heat, electric, phone, internet, liability or accident insurance, transportation insurance, homeowners insurance, businesses insurance, so that whole gamut there. And then any late fees for charges related to payments for these ongoing costs. So and we also include the concept of facility maintenance and renovations, as well as the PPE. Those are all included in the operating new pandemic costs. When we get to the point of moving into that workforce recruitment and retention, this is looking at items related to increased wages. So where the wages that you are currently paying would be in operating, this concept of being able to stabilize the workforce with increased wages or benefits, a sign-on or retention bonus, ongoing premium or hazard pay, transportation costs to and from work, all of those items that are helping us kind of retain that workforce for the children that we serve. Creating a substitute pool, providing administrative support, looking at those opportunities around coaching and training. So this would include items related to health and safety. So especially for if we're pulling in new staff, those items, as well as the ongoing costs around Ohio approved training. So that is there as well. Staff support to access COVID-19 vaccinations. This might include paid time off, transportation costs for appointments. In addition to, we also have background check expenses included in this area as well. We then take a look at the access development piece. Now, the access development piece is in three categories here. So we have increasing classroom and operating hours. And so this would include for infant and toddler, school age care, children with special needs. We have technology access. So this is looking at those learning and development opportunities. And then lastly is the addressing school age learning gaps and social emotional needs. So if you utilize the access development funding, you are not required to do all three of these activities. You can select from any of the three, two of the three, one of the three, to utilize those funds. So when we then take a look at that, that's kind of the what can we spend the money on? We look at the next piece around those allowable expenses. And so the guidance document provides some detail. I would also have you take a look at the ODJFS Child Care Manual Procedure Letter for that support around allowable expenses. And then it also provides when the expenses incurred date should be. So the only one that is a go back that you can recoup funds going backwards is that operating new pandemic costs. So that one can go back to January 31st of 2020, and then all the way through June 30th of 2022. The workforce recruitment and retention and the access development are the essentially for us that going forward type role, because for some of these, this availability of funding would allow you to do these items. And so those expense incurred dates is December 1st of 2021 through June 30th of 2022. So as you are in your application, the application, as I mentioned, has you enter the requested funding amount. So you're going to say how much you're going to use in each one of those areas. And then to the right-hand side of that, you'll select the particular activities that you believe you'll need to spend those funds. So for example, in the operating new pandemic costs, you'll select from the activities. And so you might say, yes, I am going to utilize these funds for the ongoing costs, such as rent, mortgage, utility, and insurance. And so you'll select that activity. It's a multi-select box when you're in there, so you can select more than one. We ask that you select the items that you will have expenses for. So I would not select every box, because when you get to the reconciliation, unless you have a dollar amount for each one of those boxes, it will require an extra step to correct. So really, it might take a little bit of planning, and you have a little bit of time with the application cycle to really kind of line up where you think these expenses will be. What are the expenses that you have to reflect that on the application. There are some items that are not allowable with these funds. So the purchase of a new program is not allowed. Construction or major renovations or remodeling is not included in these funds. The use of gift cards is not allowable. And then, and we typically see gift cards around that workforce recruitment and retention component. So that is not allowable with these. And then a consideration around that technology piece is that we are not able to, gaming systems, things around the gaming systems, accessories, controllers aren't included with these funds. Wanted to take a few moments on reconciliation so that you have some insight into kind of what we'll be asking for, what are we looking for with this piece. So there will be one reconciliation per phase, including any additions occurring during the application period. So it is possible with these funds, let's say a program says, yes, I'm going to use all my operating funds, all of my workforce, but I do not need access development. And then later on down the road, during that application window, they say, you know what, we actually do need that access development. A program can add an additional application to access remaining funds. So at the end of the application window is when we're looking at completing this reconciliation, and there will be one reconciliation even if there's more than one application. The reconciliation is site specific as well as the application. So if you are part of a multiple site employer, it will be one application, one reconciliation per site. There will be two parts to the reconciliation. So the expense report is going to be completed by all programs. If you were a part of our pandemic support payment grants, the look will be very similar to that. We had each category listed, and then a dollar amount will be entered for each one based on your actual expenses. So this will look very similar. And then programs will be selected for desk review. So the expense report part is for all programs. And then programs will be selected for a desk review. At that point, they'll be asked to upload their documentation to support the amounts that are claimed on the expense report. So that would include things like your receipts, and we'll go through more about documentation here in a minute. But the thought is that you have this documentation to complete the expense report. So if your program is selected, you would use that same documentation to upload. So as I had mentioned, ODJFS is working on additional guidance for additional funds that will become available. So that's important to keep in mind, because the reconciliation for the first phase must be submitted before accessing additional funds. And so you'll start to see in the guidance this same process, that you'll be able to access the next round of funds, reconcile, next application, reconcile, will be the process that we'll go through. So talking a little bit about documentation. So expense documentation typically includes documents from a third-party vendor for goods or services that shows order and payment information. So that's kind of the broad stroke of what documentation is. Now we've done a few of these calls since December 1st. So there are some items that I just want to clarify and share. So some folks have had questions about cash transactions. I would not recommend that for these funds, given the documentation and the reconciliation required with that. Creating that paper trail, if you will, of receipts, of invoices, of how items are paid is going to be very important. So if that's typically a business practice, I would not use that in this case. Also, very similar to pandemic support payment grants, the concept that we're not accepting handwritten receipts as well. So I know folks are, attempt to be very frugal with these funds and try to make them go as far as they can. But typically where we saw that in pandemic support was the concept of yard sales, garage sales, and handwriting receipts from individual to individual. And that's not going to work in this case. What I will say is that there are services that are formalized businesses. One example is carpet cleaning. That's very common. They have a business standardized form that typically looks like a letterhead piece, that there's handwritten descriptions that might be entered, like how many rooms they cleaned, that they complete there. That is acceptable because of the documented form that they're utilizing. Examples include, but are not limited to, receipts, purchase orders with payment information, paid invoices. Depending on the type of the organization, how you document the concept around payroll expenses, these sign-on bonuses, how those payments and retention bonuses occur might look a little different. So if the organization is using a third-party payroll company, it might be payroll journals would be that. If you are a family child care provider that's reimbursing yourself for items, it might be writing yourself a check or creating a transfer that is memoed so that you have that tracking and creating the paper trail for that transaction. It will be helpful, as you're kind of pulling all these items together for reconciliation, as well as if we have to review your documentation, to clearly label the expense category that you're applying this to, because it just kind of helps everyone be on the same page as this is getting reviewed. And then for multi-sites, it's possible and common that you might have one invoice, let's say for paper towels, for example, just to throw out an example, that you're buying one order of paper towels, but it's going to be distributed across multiple sites. We just ask that you tell us how that's allocated among the sites. So that one invoice might be uploaded to each site's reconciliation if selected. But it tells us that only this smaller portion of the total invoice was used for that site. So again, the resources that are available to you that are helpful in this process are the manual procedure letter, the frequently asked questions, the application guidance document. So that one's going to help you with those allowable expenses, the timelines of the subgrant, when should things be spent. The application user guide is going to be helpful in your physically completing the application because it has the screenshots of each step that will help you through how to complete that application. And then we will also be posting reconciliation guidance and user guides that will mirror the application but be specific for that reconciliation process. So we're going to open it up for questions here momentarily, but if you have questions after this call, you have a couple lines of support. So one is to email OCCRRA at support@occra.org. The local resource and referral agencies are also going to assist us in this effort because they are charged with helping us make sure that all eligible programs apply for the funds that are available to them. So you might be hearing from them if you have an application, let's say that you've started but not completed or need to finish. They can provide that. They'll be reaching out to make sure that we get everything in and that everyone applies to the funds that are available for them. So I'm going to check our chats here.
I can help you, Judith. The first person asked a question, Amber asked, does star rating affect the amount of amount a center qualifies for?
That's a great question. So star rating was not a qualification when determining the amounts of the awards. So that was not playing a factor.
Okay, and then the next question is, does receiving the PPP or the ERC make an organization ineligible?
It does not. So by receiving other funding streams or federal dollars, that does not make you ineligible. What I will say is when you look at the expenses that you're using them for, you shouldn't use these funds for the same, for example, the PPP, shouldn't use it for the same people or pay periods that PPP was used for. You know, so the concept of double dipping, we shouldn't have those same expenses.
The next question, will the monies received affect taxes at the end of the year?
So that is, we are required to provide 1099s for eligible programs based on how you complete the substitute W-9. So that is a part of the tax filing. We don't provide tax advice. So we can't tell you if that's going to require paying more taxes, but we do have to provide the appropriate tax documentation.
The next question, can the cost of COVID tests be eligible and under what grant?
Yes, so the COVID testing would be a part of the PPP, excuse me, PPE. So the personal protective equipment, that would be where you would include those pieces.
One person asked if there's if the PowerPoint is going to be available at some point in time.
Yes, we will be posting that as well to the same website that the other documents are available to on.
And then another question, is the admin support under REC and RET grant eligible to cover the cost of a director covering for direct staff who is out sick?
So that is not a component that's in recruiting and retention. However, it could be a part of operating, just the general personnel costs.
And then according to the guidance, we must implement a hiring bonus of retention policy. Is that a mandatory requirement to use of funds?
So this piece, and it's located in the Child Care Manual Procedure Letter. So if you're utilizing the sign-on bonus or the retention bonus component, there has to be an agreement between the employer and the employee. And so the pieces there that are in the chat, it's talking about the policy should include a 6-month period that the staff member agrees to remain. Date hiring bonus is issued, and that would include the retention bonus as well. Time frame for payment, a written agreement requiring continued employment for hiring and retention. Those things have to be in place, and so that would be a consideration if you're using the funds in that way. That agreement has to be there. This is also true for family child care. So if you're completing that retention bonus, you're going to assign an agreement that you will stay that 6 months as well.
Thank you. Then the next one is, can you clarify mortgage and utility expenses? Does it include county taxes?
That is not a part of it's pretty much as far as the rent, mortgage, utilities, and insurance is what they're considering that.
What is the program's average monthly operation expenses time period, for example, for 2021 actual operating expenses? I'm not sure what.
I think they're referencing, so in the application, it asks for an average monthly operating expense. And so depending on the information you have available about your business, so some it might be taking annual numbers as far as your expenses and divide by 12 to get your average monthly. If you're looking at that on a monthly basis, you can take the prior month's activity to represent that. We're just trying to gain an estimate of what that looks like by program.
So someone direct messaged me in between some of these, so I'm going down through them how I got them, if that's okay.
Oh, please.
Is there an estimate of how many times this might be renewed based on the language about new funding grant cycles?
Yes, so they are looking at bringing the additional funds. We're still getting finalization on, how many times, how much, but we will be looking at funds being available through what we call a fiscal year, so July to June of 2023.
Okay. The next one here is, in regards to bank statements, does a line item transaction at Walmart work, or does it need to be detailed?
It does need to be detailed. So typically it's, and looking at the retail stores, what you might receive as you're in the store, and the detail listing is what we'd be looking at.
Can the application be edited after it has been approved? And if so, how do you do that?
So it depends what the edit is needing, what
Okay.
the edit is. We have had some folks who need to, let's say they've selected all of the funding activities or close to it, or they realize they selected the wrong one. If you go ahead and email support@OCCRRA.org, they can change the status of that application to additional info so that those items can be tweaked. If the edit is really, I need to go back and access additional funds that weren't in my original application, then we would need to start a new application to get those funds.
Okay. What months are allowable to be used for utilities and rent for operating new or pandemic? Is it based on when the invoice is received or the actual dates of service?
Typically, it is the dates of service. So just to give an example, let's say you're using a cleaning company. They clean for the month of January 2022, but you don't physically receive the invoice until February. It would really be for when they completed the service, which is January.
If we have purchased items off Amazon, is a receipt necessary or a printed copy of the order?
That one, it gets a little tricky because it depends on where the payment information is housed. So sometimes we see in Amazon that they'll depending on the print off that we get, but we're really looking for we need to see where the item was ordered and that the payment information appears on that same printout.
Okay. Operating expenses can be ongoing, like payroll, correct?
Yes.
Okay. How soon after our application is approved will we receive payment?
So I'll talk a little bit about that process. So it's typically 4 to 6 weeks from the approval date of the application. So there's a few things that happen once that application gets approved. We invoice ODJFS for the funds. It takes them a little bit of time to get those funds back to us, and then we remit that on to the program. So like I mentioned, it's about 4 to 6 weeks from the approval status on the app.
Then I think the next question kind of asks the same thing. So when they're released, how long will you get the funds? Then the next one is, for the retention bonus, does it have to be 6-month period? And I think you talked about this already too.
So for the retention, and they have to stay 6 months. It's not that you have to pay them for, pay a retention piece for 6 months. It's that once it's paid, they have to stay for 6 months.
On the application for the grants, can you explain the rules associated with the second box you have to check when completing the grant application? I'm not sure what that refers to.
Let's see. That is, pull up. I'm curious if it is the second box for the, what we call the certification area. So in this area, and this is a component that you're essentially continuing to pay folks you're continuing their wage, their benefits, things of that nature. And I think folks have gotten a little confused on that because the state's intent is that by utilizing these funds, you're not reducing hours, you're not reducing benefits. And so I think the way that it reads through here, as well as the MPL, is that, you know, that they have still maintain those same benefits that they had before. Also, this concept of, you know, I provide a retention bonus, but then, you know, furlough folks, that's what they're trying to, you know, that all of this is that stabilization of the workforce. So they're trying to avoid some of those activities. So that's what that second statement is meaning.
The next question, if we pay staff while out for COVID, is that an allowable cost?
So if they're utilizing that as a sick leave type component, obviously, because if they're sick with COVID, they're not there, you know, they're not there, that would be allowable.
Someone asked for the website, and we're going to put the link up multiple times before we're out of here.
Yes, and you also can see it on the screen, I believe, there in blue.
Yeah. Then I think it's a follow-up from earlier. Yes, the center will receive a 1099. You'll be filed for your business taxes. So somebody's trying to help us out with answers. Can you reiterate paying yourself being a family child care provider?
Sure. So there may be personnel costs for hours worked that might be included in the operating new pandemic costs grant. So in that you would, you know, provide that rationale as far as, you know, how many hours, determining a rate, and then making sure that you're paying yourself, either, you know, writing yourself a check. And in many cases for family child care, you know, it's possible that, you know, the personal checking and what you're utilizing for business expenses is the same account. So, you know, writing that check to yourself. So we have that paper trail is what we're looking for there. Then with workforce recruitment and retention, it's a similar component because it may be things related to a retention bonus per se. So again, that agreement that's in the MPL would need to be utilized. And then that same process of either writing yourself a paper check or a mechanism to document that's how much was paid.
The next person mentioned something about facility renovations were eligible expenses, but then major renovations or remodeling is not eligible. Can you elaborate more on like the distinction between those?
Sure. So on page 5 of the guidance document, it talks about what improvements would be included. So things related to upgrading playgrounds is one of those items. So that could be, you know, the playground equipment, the structures would be included in there, renovating bathrooms, installing ramps, railings, and other accessibility features, removing non-load-bearing walls to create more space for social distancing, replacing flooring, and there's an example there, but any flooring replacement would be included, installing touch-free faucets or light switches, you know, to reduce the surface contact.
The next one is, will the operating or new pandemic costs be able to pay off the SBA loan that was taken out at the beginning of COVID to survive?
So with that piece, we'd need to look at how that's documented. So I'm happy if they want to send a question to support@OCCRRA.org to further explore that,
Okay.
because we would need to make sure that, it's within the time period that's allowed, as well as, the documentation is there to support for the funding activities that are listed for operating.
The next one's about tech. We'd like to contract out to someone else to set up all the iPads and laptops we will be ordering for our centers. Can we bill that to the third sub-grant?
So the technology is really those technology items, the software, computer, laptops, tablets. So depending on, how that's being contracted or used, it may be more of that operating to pay those personnel costs, and then to actually get the equipment and such that they're utilizing for that would be the technology piece.
And then could the purchase of cell phones for program staff to communicate to families by be allowed in a tech purchase as well?
Not at this time, it is not.
Okay. If you're behind in mortgage payments, can you use that, any of the funds for that? Is a direct question I got.
Yes, so in the operating piece, it is on page 5. So it's looking at that rent and mortgage payments that would be for that time period. And then late fees or charges could be associated to that as well.
And how about mortgage insurance as well? Or not?
Yes, if that's typically that's more of the homeowner's insurance kind of concept. Yes.
Okay. Can an AED purchased with the grant money under the PPE maybe? Somebody's looking at maybe getting an AED.
Not with these pieces, because we're really looking at those expenses with PPE associated with, the mask, and typically the AED is more of that health and safety.
The next person asked, can you give yourself a raise?
Yes, so that would be in the increased wages. That'd be workforce recruitment and retention.
Would the purchase of meals be included in the grant?
No, food is not allowable within these funds. I'm sorry. I had a little bit of a pandemic support payment bubble there. So if we look at, it's dependent upon what area. So if you're in expansion or reopening of classrooms is the caveat there. So if you look on page 11 of the guidance document, if it's meeting the requirements there, the food and beverage services are included.
Okay. And then somebody asked again, after the grant submitted, what's the expected turnaround time? I think you've addressed that.
Mm-hmm.
How long does it take to receive the grant money? Yeah, again. How long does the application process take after submission? Another person asking about how many rounds of the stabilization grant will there be? Someone asked, can bonuses be based on hours previously worked?
We don't have determining the amount or how that gets calculated. We always encourage you to have some sort of rationale, but we don't dictate what that
Okay.
is, how you determine those amounts.
Are Ohio BWC taxes and payroll benefits allowable?
Yes.
What portion of your mortgage and utilities considered allowable?
So my guess is that, in that family childcare space, typically that practice is very similar to as you're applying purchase of the household. You know, a lot of times they're using that time and space requirement for their tax purposes. So that would be similar here. So however you're calculating that would be applied in this case.
For family child care, can the bonus be used for emergency or substitute personnel? And is the minimum or max per person for the bonuses?
So again, we don't dictate a minimum or max.
Okay.
What was the first part of that question, Archer?
Can the bonuses be used for emergency or substitute personnel?
So that piece would be more in the operating than in the workforce recruitment and retention. Now, I will say, you know, if you're, you know, getting a sign-on bonus or benefits for that person who serves that role, that could be included. But if you're just saying need to pay that person for that time worked, it's probably sitting more in that operating.
Just for clarification, are these funds only available after being spent? For example, if we project expenses to incur for something in April, can we get that funded up front, or does it only mean funding for reimbursement?
So once your application is received, you're going to see about 4 to 6 weeks until payment is made. And it's based on, you know, how much you've asked for in the application. Depending on, you know, when for some in the operating, you've already spent those dollars, and so we're reimbursing you. For workforce recruitment and access development, as those are kind of moving forward funds, those would be provided to you in advance, potentially, before you've spent that expense.
Someone asked about where can the documents be found one more time, and I think it's been put in the chat multiple times afterwards. Does HVAC system include for ventilation?
Sure.
You're not going to be as optimistic as you can be.
So that one, I'd need to get additional clarification on what because ventilation could mean a few different things. So I need additional information there.
If you're using the grant for rent and utilities, what would you use to show that you're paid those items?
A statement or a bill and how you paid that, if it was you paid it by check or how the payment method went.
Will doors and screen doors be allowable?
Yeah, so that would be included in the facilities component. The maintenance.
Can it be used to pay a company to update your website?
No, I don't believe so, because I'm not seeing what section that would fall into, given the guidance we have.
If a provider does not want to receive subgrant funds, must they still apply and select $0 as amount requested? And what will happen if they don't apply for nothing?
We are asking that you do complete that. Part of that is, as I mentioned, the R&Rs are going to be following up. And so if you truly don't want to access the funds, that would be the mechanism that would tell us that it's not that you're undecided or haven't finished it, that you really truly want to waive those funds, so that we, you know, don't bother you to complete the process if you don't want to do that.
Someone asked, how do you see specific maximum funds available to your specific center? Is that listed somewhere?
It is in the manual procedure letter. There's charts about that, as well as when you open the application, you'll see the maximum funding amounts for each subgrant for your particular program.
What are the timeframes for mortgage payments for family child care?
So it would be for the mortgage months, that would be a part of the operating. So that would go back from January 2020. And that would be on page 3 of the guidance document. So we're looking at January 31st, 2020 through June 30th of 2022.
Awesome. You know it forwards and backwards, don't you? All of it. It's great. Can upgrading your privacy fence be included?
Yes, fencing is a part of that facility maintenance.
If staff has purchased a computer to operate in the center for work, can the tech funds be used to reimburse them?
It would be dependent upon if it's meeting the guidance around learning and development. So, you know, with the use of with the children for those purposes.
Can you use your insurance such as workers' comp, Cincinnati, city of Cincinnati and the state of Ohio? I don't know that.
I'm not sure I'm following that one.
I don't either. Sorry. Would an entry door to the type B home be considered construction?
We would need to show that it's a door utilized, you know, with the children. So if that's the door that they're utilizing, then that would be allowable.
Can you use it for car repair?
No.
Can you buy appliances?
So there are some appliances referenced in the PPP area. So I'd have you take a look at that. So that's on page 6. That has some of those pieces in there for what's allowable.
If using the money for retention bonuses, does there need to be something like a contract stating the employee will stay, and then the administrator and the employee sign it, then submit that contract for documentation?
The agreement does need to exist. And in the child care manual procedure letter, it provides what that agreement needs to have included.
During the time period of the grant, if a center has to close for any time period due to COVID outbreak, would the center be required to pay their employees for the time off, or can the employees file for unemployment?
So if they're filing for unemployment, that would be a part of the furlough piece. And so that's what they're trying to avoid with these funds. So you could actually, you know, utilize these funds to help assist that if it's a sick pay type situation. But that's what they're trying to avoid.
Can you use the funds towards payment of your 2021 taxes?
No.
Someone asked if we were going to receive a copy of the Zoom call. I'm not sure how we're doing that exactly. Once the grant is approved, will it be sent in a check form or electronically to your bank? And I think that you talked about that too, but I'll let you go ahead and answer it.
Sure. So when you complete the application, one of the steps is going through the payment portal. And in that payment portal, you're providing us with a substitute W-9 that includes tax ID information. And then if you are opting into an electronic funds transfer, you're providing us with the banking information to do so. If there is not a bank account associated with your program, you can opt for a paper check to be sent.
A clarification question: are both the application process and the approval process both 4 to 6 weeks, or is it just the approval process 4 to 6 weeks?
That's a great question. Let me clarify that. So to get from approval to payment is the 4 to 6 weeks. We are not running 4 to 6 weeks on approvals at this point. It's less than that.
Repair for program buses for use of transporting children.
Right, those transportation pieces are not included.
Okay. Someone also asked about the recording, and I'm not sure how we're handling that per se. For a Head Start with multiple centers of different sizes, would one application overall for the Head Start program work, or would an application for each center be required?
An application and reconciliation for each center. So it's determined by license number would be how that would work.
Is advertising for staff recruitment and also for center enrollment an allowable expense? If so, are all medias allowed?
Yes, so expenses related to that workforce recruitment piece would be included, and it would actually be a part of the create substitute pool, provide administrative support. So that administrative support piece is all of that recruiting. So if you're placing Indeed ads, things of that nature, that would be where it's housed.
In a family childcare setting, if we plan to increase our wages, do we still need to do a retention waiver?
If it's purely an increased wages piece, that would not be required. It's that sign-on retention bonus. That's the part that requires the agreement and the staying 6 months.
Can you use the funds for a new furnace?
That one, I'd go ahead and have you send that into support. I'll double check that one as well.
I apologize. Many people also said thank you, Judith, in the
Oh,
these messages. I skipped over some of those thank yous.
oh, no worries.
When do the documents have to be submitted once you have the money for the grant?
So as soon as I would recommend that as soon as the funds are expended and you have the documentation, that you complete the reconciliation process. We anticipate with the new funds, and I know that, until we kind of have some clear guidance, it's a little vague, but the concept is that you have to submit the reconciliation for the funds that are currently active before you can access a new round of funding. And so I encourage you to do that so that, you don't have to wait a while until you have that guidance pulled together. So I would pull it together as soon as you can, submit the reconciliation, and then you're going to be ready and queued up for that next funding cycle when it comes.
Can we use the funds to pay the city of Cincinnati for workers' comp and for the state, like state taxes and stuff like that?
So if it's payroll related, so things like the workers' comp, there's an unemployment component to that as far as the insurance premium, not paying unemployment, that can be included in those personnel costs. But there's other types of taxes that would not be included.
I have to get an egress window installed in the area I'm using for childcare. Is that considered a major or minor repair?
That would be included in the facility maintenance.
If you've already received an approval, can you start sending in reconciliations?
We anticipate having the reconciliation component ready for entry mid-January. So that would be when you could start entering your expense reports at that time.
In regards to tech, can money be used to repair or service computers?
Yes, if it's the computers that the children are utilizing.
Is this similar to the application back in October 2021? Someone asks.
So yes and no, I guess, is the correct answer to that. So similarities do include that, we administered the prior stimulus money. So this is the new stimulus money with the ARPA funds. There still is a reconciliation process. So there are some of those same similarities between the two.
Can you use a bank receipt to show proof of rent since 2022?
It depends what the bank receipt says. If it is, we need to know who it was being paid to and an amount, so that we can determine and the month it was being paid for. So those are the types of things that we would need to identify. So I'm not sure if that information is included on the bank receipt they're referencing.
Is the renewal also to be a 6-month funding cycle based on approved expenses dates?
I think they're meaning the potential for additional
Yeah, I
funds.
think so.
And we don't have finalized guidance on that. I know they've been looking at more of a quarterly basis, but we don't have that finalized.
So someone asked, just for clarification, a family child care provider can create and sign a retention bonus for themselves. And
Yes.
Lots of thank yous. Can you define more detail a major or minor repair? Is a threshold? Is there a threshold amount?
There is not a threshold amount because that is included in the operating new pandemic cost grants. So you're provided a particular amount for that area, and you're telling us of those activities how much you would like to spend in a particular area. I would have you reference page 5 of the guidance document because that's going to talk more about that facility maintenance and renovation.
Is a new entry door considered a major construction?
I think we answered that a little earlier that
Yeah, I
that
think
was
so.
allowable. Yep.
Can we purchase computers, Chromebooks for children's use?
Yes, that technology piece is where that would be housed.
Can you use money order receipts to show proof of rent paid?
Yes, as I mentioned before, that those documentation pieces, you just have to make sure that, you know, the amount, who you're paying it to, the month, that is all visible for our review if it needs to be submitted for documentation.
Someone's asking, how and where do you sign up for the family child care retention bonus?
So it would be a part of the program stabilization grant. So you would access those funds through the workforce recruitment and retention component. And the agreement that would need to be in place for the retention bonus, the information about that can be found in the manual procedure letter for these funds.
Is there a penalty if we request an amount and then for some reason don't use the full amount requested?
So, excuse me, yes, we would need to have those funds repaid. And that's part of that reconciliation process as well. So I'm gonna take a quick drink. So if you access a certain amount of funds and you're not able to spend all those funds, then we do need that to be repaid. Excuse me, one moment.
So we can't keep the money, we have to pay it back.
That is correct.
Would a new roof be an allowable expense for family child care? And if so, would it be the whole amount or of the cost or percentage?
It would be a percentage, and I talked a little bit before, typically for tax purposes, it's that percentage used for the family child care business, and so that would apply in that case.
You said that the person who opened the application be the person that submits the application. Just wanted to clarify on how you know who opened the application to ensure this matches.
So the person that opens the application, we have demographic information that pre-populates. And so that demographic information is from that person. And so we need to make sure that, you know, the application gets completed using that person's information because that's remitted onto the feds. If you find that someone else has opened that and you need to change that, email support@OCCRRA.org and we can close the old application and open a new one.
If you didn't add your rental insurance on the first allotment, and if there's going to be a second allotment, can you submit it on the second grant application if there's going to be one?
It'll depend on, we'll have allowable expense periods for each of the funding cycles. And so it'll depend on if that time period is allowed in a future period.
We just purchased computers for the classroom. Can we include the receipts for those, or would we have to purchase more?
It depends on when they were purchased. So if they were purchased December 1st or after, that could be included in technology.
Okay. Can you purchase computer for owner use for like bookkeeping and training and lesson plans and things like that?
I'd have them go ahead and reference the technology section because we're really looking at those learning and development opportunities.
More thank yous. Can you pay rent once grant is received, for example, 6 months in advance?
It would have to be for the allowable expense period. So if you receive that in, let's give an example, April, and you pay May and June, because that's within this allowable expense period, that's okay. But you can't go beyond that and expect to apply it to these funds.
How much and how long does it take for the family child care to get the retention bonus?
I think there might be a little bit of confusion on that piece for family child care. You're applying for the grant. And so with those grant funds, you are paying yourself a retention bonus.
But you've got to document it.
Yes, and provide it, have an active agreement that you've signed that you'll continue to provide services for 6 months.
Is the furniture that you house the technology equipment an allowable expense? Like tables and things like that for like a computer table?
That's not included in the technology piece.
Can you use funds for playgrounds?
Yes. That would be in the facility maintenance and renovations on page 5 of the guidance document.
For tablets that daily reports and assessments are completed on? Can you purchase tablets that like maybe teachers are using to do the daily reports and lesson plans and things like that on?
Again, as long as you're saying that that is for the learning and development, that's what we're approaching that with.
For family child care, do we just need to write ourselves a check for the increased wage sub-grant reconciliation? And I think you've addressed that already. Will there be another application in July? I think you've mentioned that already.
Yes, for any additional funding cycles, there'll be an application and a reconciliation.
Okay. And I've caught up with the bottom of the chat.
There you go. It was a race, wasn't it, Archer?
It felt like it. And there were lots of thank yous in between there. I just know that in order to try to like maintain time and things like that, there was lots of thank yous and very informatives and things like that.
I definitely appreciate it. Well, I appreciate everyone's time today. I know it's a lot to take in and appreciate you spending time with us to go through it. I would definitely, print out those documents, have them handy as you're doing some planning about how you want to use these funds, that it'll be very helpful. Again, if you have additional questions after this call, emailing support@OCCRRA.org. We'll be happy to answer the questions that you have there. And of course, the R&Rs will provide additional support in that area as well.